I returned home just hours after major surgery, only to have my own sister scream at me to stop faking my pain and cook dinner right this instant. She relentlessly demanded my service, totally blind to the incredibly powerful man standing quietly right behind me. Watch what happens when karma finally collects its debts. My name is Simone, and at 34 years old, I never expected my flesh and blood to treat me worse than a stray dog on the street. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who completely underestimated your true worth. The physical pain radiating from my abdomen was absolutely nothing compared to the emotional betrayal I was about to experience in my hallway. The crisp autumn wind whipped against my face as I slowly pushed open the heavy oak front door of my house. Every single step sent a sharp, agonizing jolt through my stomach where my gallbladder had been removed just yesterday. The surgical bandages underneath my loose cotton dress were already starting to feel damp from a fresh layer of blood seeping through the white gauze. I clutched my side, gasping softly as I stepped into the foyer, hoping for just a few hours of quiet rest in my own bed. But peace was a luxury my family never allowed me to have. Before I could even kick off my flat shoes, a heavy canvas apron came flying through the air and slapped hard against my chest. "Grab that apron and get your lazy body into the kitchen right now," Vanessa shrieked, marching down the hallway with her hands planted firmly on her hips. My older sister was 36 years old, but still acted like a spoiled teenager who believed the entire universe revolved around her convenience. She was wearing a skin-tight designer dress, and her hair was styled to absolute perfection. "Stop faking that pathetic little stomach ache, Simone," she sneered, rolling her eyes. "Trent has his most important investors coming over for a VIP dinner in exactly 3 hours. I already told his corporate bosses that I am cooking a 5-star meal tonight. Do not ruin this for me just because you are jealous of my perfect marriage." I stared at her in pure disbelief. "I literally just left the hospital, Vanessa," I whispered, clutching the doorframe to keep my balance. "The doctor said I need strict bed rest. I cannot stand over a hot stove and cook a massive banquet for your husband right now." Vanessa scoffed loudly, stepping closer to me with a look of pure disgust on her perfectly contoured face. "Oh, please," she mocked, waving her hand dismissively. "You just had a tiny little procedure. Do not act like you are dying. You dropped out of a prestigious college just to flip burgers and cook for strangers anyway. This is the only useful thing you know how to do. Trent is trying to secure a $50 million investment tonight, and if you mess this up, he will be furious." Her vicious words echoed through the entryway, but she was so completely consumed by her own arrogant vanity that she did not even notice the tall, imposing figure standing silently just outside the open front door. Julian had insisted on driving me home from the hospital himself. He was currently dressed in a faded gray sweatshirt, a plain black baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, and worn-out denim jeans. He held my small plastic bag of prescription pain medication in his large hands. To anyone else, he looked like an ordinary working-class man blending perfectly into the background. Vanessa finally caught a glimpse of him standing on the porch, and her face instantly twisted into a harsh, judgmental sneer. "Who the hell is this guy?" she snapped, crossing her arms over her chest. "Did you seriously make your cheap Uber driver wait at the door? Or is this your new broke boyfriend, Simone? I swear you always attract the most pathetic losers." "Listen here, buddy," she barked, pointing a perfectly manicured acrylic nail right at Julian's face. "Simone does not have any spare cash to tip you today, so just leave the bags on the mat and get off my expensive porch before I call the neighborhood security on you. We have wealthy upper-class guests arriving soon, and I cannot have them seeing people like you loitering around my beautiful property." Julian did not say a single word. He did not flinch or react to her blatant disrespect. He simply lowered his gaze, allowing the shadow of his baseball cap to hide the dangerous calculation in his dark eyes. What my arrogant sister failed to realize was that this man in the faded sweatshirt was Julian Sterling. He was a ruthless billionaire technology mogul, and the sole owner of the massive investment fund her husband Trent was desperately begging for money from. I had saved Julian's life during a severe allergic reaction at a catering gig 2 years ago, and since that day we had become incredibly close business partners. I opened my mouth to defend him, but I suddenly felt my phone vibrate inside my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a new text message flash across the screen. Play along, Simone, let us see exactly how deep they are willing to dig their own graves. I looked up and saw Julian giving me a subtle nod before he quietly turned and walked down the driveway. He was going to wait in his luxury car, parked discreetly down the street. I took a deep, trembling breath and picked up the apron from the floor. My sister smiled victoriously, thinking she had won. She had absolutely no idea the devastating storm that was about to destroy her entire fake life. I stood there clutching the stiff canvas fabric of the apron against my chest. Every breath I took sent a sharp wave of fire through my surgical wound. Before I could attempt to walk toward the kitchen, the front door swung open again. My mother, Brenda, marched inside carrying 2 shopping bags filled with expensive wine. She was dressed in her Sunday best, even though it was Wednesday afternoon. She wore a tailored suit and a massive pearl necklace. She stopped dead in her tracks the moment she saw me standing in the foyer. Did she ask how my surgery went? Did she ask if the doctors successfully removed my gallbladder? No, she did not. Her eyes immediately darted down to the floor, where I had kicked off my flat shoes just minutes ago. Simone, what on earth is wrong with you? My mother snapped, her voice dripping with disappointment. Pick those dirty shoes up right this instant. Are you trying to make this house look like a cheap motel? Trent will be home from his corporate office any minute now. You know how much he hates seeing your cheap things cluttering up his beautiful entryway. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. Mom, I just got discharged from the hospital, I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the overwhelming pain. I can barely bend over. Please, just leave the shoes there for now. My mother slammed the heavy wine bottles down onto the polished wooden console table. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Simone, she huffed, crossing her arms. Vanessa told me you had some minor stomach procedure. You are 34 years old. It is time to stop playing the victim to get attention. Look at your sister. She is upstairs getting ready to host the most important dinner party of her life, and you are down here complaining about a tummy ache. I tightened my grip on the apron. My own mother was calling major organ removal a minor tummy ache to invalidate my suffering. But this was exactly how it always been. Growing up, my mother worshipped the ground Vanessa walked on simply because Vanessa had lighter skin. My mother cared about nothing more than keeping up appearances at church and securing a wealthy lifestyle. When Vanessa married Trent, a tall, arrogant white man with a high-paying corporate job, she practically treated him like a god. You need to go into that kitchen and make yourself useful right now, my mother commanded, pointing her finger toward the back of the house. Trent is bringing his top investors over. These are powerful men, Simone. They are not the kind of people who eat greasy fried chicken and macaroni you make at your catering gigs. Trent asked Vanessa to handle the menu because he wants everything to be sophisticated and high class. But Vanessa cannot do all the heavy lifting and chopping by herself. She needs a sous chef, so you will go in there and follow her instructions perfectly. I felt a bitter laugh rising in my throat. My sister could barely boil water without burning the pot, but they were pretending she was a master chef just to impress a group of arrogant corporate executives. Why do I have to be the one to suffer? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. Why am I expected to act like a servant in this house when I can barely stand up straight? My mother took a threatening step toward me, her eyes narrowed into angry slits. Because Trent pays the mortgage on this house, you ungrateful brat, she hissed, leaning in close so I could smell the mint on her breath. That man works 60 hours a week at a prestigious investment firm. He provides a luxurious life for your sister. He is generous enough to let you live here rent-free in the guest bedroom after you ruined your life and dropped out of college. He even takes my retirement money every month and handles the mortgage payments to the bank so I do not have to worry about the paperwork. The absolute least you can do is chop some vegetables and cook a meal for his boss without throwing a pathetic tantrum. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. The physical pain in my stomach was entirely eclipsed by the burning rage spreading through my chest. Trent pays the mortgage. That was the most hilarious and disgusting lie I had ever heard in my entire life. My mother was so incredibly blind. She worshipped a man who smiled in her face while quietly stealing everything she had. What my mother did not know was that Trent had absolutely nothing to do with this house. 5 years ago, I bought this property entirely in cash, using the profits from my private chef business and my massive restaurant investments. I put the deed completely in my name. I let my mother and Vanessa live here because I pitied them. When Trent married Vanessa, he convinced my mother to give him her $100,000 retirement fund, claiming he would use it to pay off the remaining mortgage directly to the bank. There was no mortgage. Trent had forged fake bank statements every single month to trick my mother. He was pocketing her hard-earned retirement money to fund his expensive golf trips and buy Vanessa designer bags to keep up his wealthy facade. And they all believed I was just the broke sister living in their basement out of charity. I looked at my mother, seeing the utter contempt in her eyes. I wanted to scream the truth right then and there. I wanted to tell her that the house she was standing in belonged to me. I wanted to tell her that the billionaire investor Trent was trying to impress was currently waiting quietly outside for my exact signal. But Julian told me to play along perfectly tonight. The heavy thud of the front door closing echoed through the hallway, snapping my mother out of her rant. The sound of expensive leather dress shoes clicking against the hardwood floor signaled the arrival of the man of the house. Trent strode into the foyer, loosening his silk tie with an air of absolute exhaustion that he always performed for my mother. He was a tall man with perfectly styled blonde hair and a sharp-tailored suit that screamed corporate arrogance. The moment my mother saw him, her entire demeanor shifted from vicious to sickeningly sweet. She practically ran over to take his briefcase, fawning over him, as if he had just returned from fighting a war instead of sitting in an air-conditioned office. Trent offered her a tight, practiced smile before his cold blue eyes locked onto me. The fake warmth vanished instantly, replaced by a look of profound disdain. He looked me up and down, taking in my loose dress and the simple canvas apron I was still clutching. He sighed loudly, rubbing his temples as if my mere existence was a massive burden on his day. I thought I told Vanessa to have everything prepped by the time I got home, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Why are you just standing there, Simone? The executives from the Sterling Fund are going to be here in less than 3 hours. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth and forced myself to speak calmly. I just got back from the hospital, Trent. I had surgery yesterday and I am still bleeding. I cannot stand for long periods of time. Trent scoffed, shaking his head as he stepped closer to me. His height was meant to intimidate me, but I refused to break eye contact. Look, Simone, I really do not have the time or the patience for your typical excuses today. This dinner is the most important night of my entire career. I am securing a $50 million investment from Julian Sterling himself. This is the big leagues. This is not one of your little urban catering gigs where you just throw some seasoned salt on cheap meat and call it a day. He stepped even closer, invading my personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne was suffocating. Listen to me very carefully, he lowered his voice so my mother, who was busy hanging his coat, could not hear. These men are wealthy, sophisticated elites. They have refined palates. I do not want you cooking any of that heavy, greasy soul food you usually make. No fried chicken, no macaroni and cheese, no collard greens. I need elegance. I need precision. I need food that actually looks like it belongs on a fine dining menu, not in a cheap takeout box. Do you understand what I am saying, or is that too complicated for your community college dropout brain to process? Every word out of his mouth was a heavily coded racist microaggression. He was standing in a house that I owned, telling me that my culture and my culinary skills were beneath his white corporate friends. He had absolutely no idea that the urban catering gigs he was mocking were actually exclusive private dinners for billionaires, athletes, and celebrities. He had no idea that I owned a hospitality group that generated more revenue in a month than his firm made in a year. But the physical pain radiating from my abdomen was making it difficult to stand up straight. A sharp spasm hit my surgical wound, forcing me to lean heavily against the kitchen counter behind me. I gripped the cold marble edge so tightly my knuckles turned white, desperately trying not to let him see me wince. Trent noticed my weakness and smiled a cruel, satisfied smirk. He leaned in so close I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. "Let me make this crystal clear for you, Simone. I pay for the roof over your head. I pay for the electricity keeping the lights on in this kitchen. If you embarrass me tonight in front of these investors, I will personally pack your bags and throw you out onto the street before midnight. I do not care if you are bleeding. I do not care if you are in pain. You will go in there, and you will make Vanessa look like a culinary genius. If you fail, I will make sure you never step foot in this house again." He pulled back, adjusting his expensive cuffs with a look of utter disgust. "Now get to work," he snapped, turning his back on me to greet Vanessa, who was just coming down the stairs in a ridiculous cocktail dress. I stayed frozen against the kitchen counter, fighting the urge to vomit from the agonizing pain shooting through my torso. I closed my eyes, taking slow, shallow breaths to steady my racing heart. I just had to survive the next few hours. But I was not alone. From the dark shadows of the hallway just beyond the archway leading to the dining room, a figure stood completely perfectly still. Julian had let himself back into the house through the side door using the spare key I had given him months ago. He had heard every single word Trent said. He had witnessed every racist insult and every vile threat. I caught his eye through the dim lighting. The playful, relaxed demeanor he had outside was completely gone. His jaw was clenched tight, and his eyes burned with a quiet, lethal fury. While Trent was busy kissing my mother on the cheek and complimenting Vanessa, Julian slowly reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out his cell phone. He did not say a single word. He just stared a hole into Trent's back as he dialed his lead corporate attorney. The trap was officially set, and Trent had just locked himself inside. He had no idea his entire world would shatter. I forced myself to stand up straight and pushed through the swinging door into the massive kitchen. The pain in my abdomen was a constant burning sensation, but I had to focus entirely on the food. Trent had demanded a meal fit for billionaires, so I was going to give him exactly what he asked for. I pulled out the premium ingredients I had personally ordered and paid for earlier that week using my own funds. There were thick cuts of grade A5 Japanese Wagyu beef resting on the butcher block. I took out fresh black truffles imported directly from Italy and began carefully shaving them into a rich reduction sauce. I set up the immersion circulator for the sous vide bath, calibrating the water temperature to precisely 54 degrees Celsius to ensure the steaks would cook to an absolute flawless medium rare. Every movement I made was slow and calculated to protect my fresh surgical wound. I chopped organic herbs and whisked the delicate sauces while gritting my teeth against the sharp, pulling sensation in my stomach. Cooking was usually my ultimate sanctuary, but today it felt like a grueling physical punishment. Just as I was preparing the truffle butter glaze, the kitchen door swung wide open. Vanessa strutted into the room carrying a massive professional ring light and a tripod. She had completely changed her outfit again. She was now wearing a pristine white designer dress with a plunging neckline and high heels that clicked sharply against the tile floor. She looked like she was heading to a red carpet event, not preparing a five-star meal over a hot stove. She dragged the heavy tripod right into the middle of my workspace, forcing me to step back and bump my hip against the island. "Watch where you are going, Simone," she snapped, adjusting the brightness of the glaring LED light. "I need the perfect angle for my social media followers. My fans have been waiting all week to see what culinary masterpiece I am whipping up for this huge corporate dinner tonight." She positioned her latest model smartphone on the stand and quickly checked her makeup in the reflection. She grabbed a spotless white apron from the hook and tied it loosely around her waist, making sure it did not cover up her expensive dress. I watched in quiet disbelief as she tapped the record button and instantly transformed her face into a bright, welcoming smile. "Hey everyone! Welcome back to my kitchen," she cooed into the camera, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Tonight is a very special night because my amazing husband is hosting a VIP dinner for his top investors. I have been working hard all day preparing this incredible Wagyu beef and truffle menu entirely from scratch. She completely ignored the fact that I was standing just a few feet away, bleeding through my bandages and doing all the actual labor. Vanessa picked up a clean wooden spoon and leaned over the simmering pot of reduction sauce, pretending to stir it gently for the camera. The secret to a perfect sauce is patience and love, she lied flawlessly to her audience. I have been letting this simmer for hours to get that rich, deep flavor. She posed with the spoon, making sure the lighting caught her diamond ring perfectly. She spent the next 20 minutes recording short video clips of herself holding up the expensive ingredients I had bought, and taking full credit for the complex culinary techniques I was currently executing. She even had the audacity to point at the bubbling sous vide machine and explain how she had scientifically calculated the exact water temperature to tenderize the meat. The kitchen was growing incredibly hot, and the combination of the heat and my physical exhaustion was making me dizzy. I needed to reach the specialty sea salt positioned on the spice rack right behind where Vanessa had set up her camera. I waited until she paused her recording before I slowly stepped forward to grab the small glass jar. But just as my hand brushed against the rack, Vanessa suddenly hit the record button again to film a new angle of the Wagyu steaks. My arm and the side of my face accidentally appeared in the corner of her video frame. Vanessa let out a sharp gasp of pure rage. Without a single second of hesitation, she turned and shoved me violently in the chest with both of her hands. "Get out of my shot, you idiot," she hissed. The unexpected force of her push threw me completely off balance. I stumbled backward, and my lower back slammed hard against the sharp edge of the granite kitchen island. A blinding flash of white-hot agony exploded across my abdomen as my fresh surgical stitches stretched dangerously tight. I gasped, choking on my own breath, as I slid down to the floor, clutching my stomach in absolute torment. Vanessa did not flinch or offer to help me up. She simply wiped her hands on her clean apron and glared down at me with utter contempt. "You are ruining my aesthetic, Simone," she snarled, stepping over my legs to check her phone screen. "This dinner is about my success and my glamorous lifestyle, not your pathetic existence. I am the star of this kitchen today. You are nothing but the hired help, so you need to act like it. Stay completely out of sight and do not you dare ruin another one of my videos." She turned her back to me, smiling brightly into the camera once again like the perfect wife. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears of pain while warm blood slowly began soaking through my cotton shirt. I had to force myself back up onto my feet and finish cooking this elaborate feast because Julian was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I knew my sweet revenge was rapidly approaching and it would be absolutely glorious. I braced my hands against the cool tile floor and forced myself to stand. The agonizing pull in my abdomen made my vision blur for a fraction of a second, but I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I could feel the warm dampness of blood pressing against my bandages. I hid the red stain blooming on my shirt. Vanessa was still twirling around the kitchen island, entirely oblivious to the torment she had just inflicted on me. She was too busy smiling into her camera and checking her hair in the refrigerator reflection. I turned my attention back to the Wagyu resting on the butcher block. These steaks cost $800 and required absolute precision. I had spent years mastering the exact culinary science needed to prepare them. I reached for the delicate, flaky sea salt I had specifically imported for this dish, but my sudden movement caught my sister's eye. Vanessa quickly repositioned her tripod, pointing the lens directly at the expensive meat. "Wait, Simone, stop right there," she commanded, waving her manicured hand. "My followers want to see me actually doing something culinary. I need an action shot of me aggressively seasoning the steaks like those famous chefs do on television." Before I could warn her, she reached past my expensive spices and grabbed a giant plastic container of cheap iodized table salt from the back of the pantry. She scooped out a massive handful of the harsh chemical salt. She positioned her hand directly over the beautifully marbled Wagyu, preparing to dump the fistful onto the delicate meat. The sheer volume of that cheap salt would completely destroy the flavor profile and ruin $800 worth of premium beef in a single second. My professional instincts kicked in instantly, overriding my physical pain. I lunged forward and slapped her hand hard. The plastic container flew out of her grip and clattered loudly, spilling a mountain of white salt across the tiles. "Do not touch that meat," I snapped, my voice laced with absolute authority. "You are going to ruin an $800 cut of beef with cheap table salt for a stupid video." Vanessa gasped dramatically, clutching her hand against her chest, as if I had just broken her wrist. She looked at the spilled salt on the floor, and then glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "How dare you touch me!" she shrieked at the top of her lungs, ensuring her voice echoed throughout the entire first floor of the house. "You psycho! You ruined my perfectly good video!" Her piercing scream cut through the quiet ambiance of the house like a siren. Heavy footsteps immediately thundered down the hallway. The kitchen door violently swung open, and Trent stormed into the room, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell is going on in here?" he bellowed, looking back and forth between the spilled salt and his wife. Vanessa instantly morphed into the ultimate victim. She forced tears into her eyes and pointed a trembling finger right at me. "Trent, she just attacked me!" Vanessa cried, her voice shaking with fake terror. "I was just trying to help her season the food for your important guests, and she hit me out of nowhere. She is completely out of control." Trent did not even bother asking for my side of the story. He crossed the kitchen in 3 massive strides and grabbed my upper arm. His large fingers dug painfully into my flesh, gripping me so tightly I felt bruises instantly forming under my skin. He yanked me away from the butcher block, forcing me to look up into his furious, cold blue eyes. "You listen to me, you worthless piece of trash!" he hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You are nothing but a massive failure. You dropped out of a real college just to cook cheap meals for a living, and you think you have the right to put your hands on my wife. The only reason you are not sleeping on a park bench right now is because Vanessa begged me to let you stay in this house. We put this roof over your head. We pay for the food you eat. I am giving you a chance to do something useful with your miserable life tonight, and you pull this garbage." I gritted my teeth, staring straight back into his eyes. My arm was throbbing, and my surgical wound was burning like fire, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "Take your hands off me, Trent," I demanded, my voice remarkably steady. He squeezed my arm even harder, leaning his face menacingly close to mine. "You do not make demands in my house," he growled. "You will clean up this mess. You will finish cooking this meal, and you will apologize to my wife. If you step out of line one more time, I will drag you out of the front door by your hair and leave you in the street." He finally shoved me backward, releasing his crushing grip on my arm. I stumbled, catching myself against the counter edge. Trent turned to comfort Vanessa, pulling her into a gentle hug and kissing her forehead while she sniffled and played the role of the traumatized victim perfectly. They stood there wrapped in their twisted, arrogant delusion, fully believing they possessed ultimate power over my life and my future. They believed they were untouchable masters of their domain, but they were completely oblivious to the silent witness standing just a few feet away. The swinging door connecting the kitchen to the formal dining room was cracked open exactly 2 inches. Standing perfectly still in the dim shadows of the dining room was Julian. He had his sleek smartphone pressed right against the narrow crack of the doorframe. The red recording dot on his screen was blinking steadily. He had captured every single second of the altercation. The red recording dot on his screen disappeared as Julian quietly saved the video directly to his secure cloud server, ensuring the evidence of Trent's physical abuse was permanently locked away. Just as Trent took a deep breath to hurl another venomous insult at me, the sharp melodic chime of the front doorbell echoed through the sprawling house. The sound acted like an instant magical switch. Trent's entire demeanor transformed in a fraction of a second. The furious monster who had just bruised my arm vanished completely. He released his clenched fists, smoothed down the front of his expensive tailored suit jacket, and plastered on a bright, eager smile. "They are here," he panicked, running a hand through his hair. "Vanessa, fix your makeup and get out to the foyer right now. We cannot keep the Sterling Fund executives waiting on the porch." Vanessa immediately dropped her victim act. She tossed her hair over her shoulder, pinched her cheeks to give them a rosy flush, and practically sprinted out of the kitchen with her husband trailing closely behind her. They left me standing alone in the suffocating heat of the kitchen, leaning heavily against the counter, as another wave of agonizing pain washed over my surgical wound. I wiped a layer of cold sweat from my forehead. From the kitchen I could hear the heavy oak front door swing open, followed instantly by a chorus of deep booming voices entering the foyer. Trent's voice pitched an octave higher than usual, dripping with a sickeningly sweet tone of pure desperation. "Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome to our humble home." Trent practically sang, his voice echoing down the hallway. "Mr. Harrington, Mr. Vance, it is an absolute honor to have the senior partners of the Sterling Fund in my house tonight. Please come in and let me take your coats." I could hear the heavy thud of expensive leather shoes walking across the hardwood floor. Trent was fawning over these men like a loyal golden retriever desperate for a treat from its master. He introduced Vanessa with excessive pride. "Gentlemen, this is my beautiful wife, Vanessa," Trent boasted. "She has been working tirelessly in the kitchen all day preparing an exclusive 5-star culinary experience for you tonight. She studied culinary techniques in Paris, you know." I rolled my eyes so hard my head hurt. Vanessa had never been to Paris in her entire life. The executives murmured their polite appreciation. They moved slowly toward the formal dining room, their voices blending into a low murmur of corporate jargon and golf course anecdotes. While Trent was busy groveling in the foyer, my mother Brenda was holding court in the adjacent formal living room. The kitchen door was still cracked open just enough for me to hear every single word she said. She was sitting on my expensive velvet sofa, holding her smartphone right up to her face on speakerphone. She was talking to Sister Mildred. "Yes, Mildred, I am telling you, Trent is an absolute blessing from the Lord," my mother bragged loudly. "He is securing a $50 million deal tonight." "Yes, honey, he takes such good care of us. He pays the mortgage on this massive estate without ever complaining." The women on the speakerphone oohed and awed in jealousy, praising my mother for securing such a wonderful son-in-law. "And what about Simone?" one of the churchwomen asked, her voice crackling through the phone speaker. "Is she still struggling with that little catering business?" My mother let out a loud dramatic sigh of pure condescension. "Oh, you know Simone, she is always scraping by." Trent and Vanessa were gracious enough to let her live here in the guest room. We actually have her in the kitchen right now, helping out with the dinner. She is just doing some basic chopping and cleaning so she can feel useful. You know we have to give her some charity work to keep her busy. I clenched my jaw as her cruel words drifted into the kitchen. My mother was sitting in a house that I fully owned, bragging about a man who was actively stealing her retirement money and reducing my multi-million-dollar culinary empire to a pathetic charity project. I pushed the hot anger down deep into my chest and focused every ounce of my remaining energy on the food in front of me. The pain in my abdomen was becoming a sharp, persistent throbbing, but I refused to let it defeat me. I carefully arranged the first course on 6 imported porcelain plates. I was serving a delicate Wagyu beef tartare, topped with a tiny quail egg resting on a bed of crispy brioche, accompanied by a precise dollop of golden Osetra caviar. My hands trembled slightly from physical exhaustion, but my culinary precision remained absolutely flawless. I used silver tweezers to place a single microscopic leaf of edible gold onto each plate. The kitchen felt like a sweltering furnace. My loose cotton dress was sticking to my back and the bandage across my stomach felt tight and heavy. I was completely hidden from the glamorous dinner party happening just a few feet away, locked out of sight like a shameful secret. Trent and Vanessa were out there soaking up the glory, drinking expensive wine, and laughing with billionaires while I bled in the kitchen, doing all of their heavy lifting. But as I placed the final garnish onto the caviar, I allowed a small, genuine smile to touch my lips. Trent thought he was in total control. Vanessa thought she was the star of the show. My mother thought her white son-in-law was her ultimate salvation. They were all celebrating a massive victory that was completely built on a foundation of fragile lies. I wiped down the counter, plated the appetizers perfectly on a silver tray, and waited. The trap was fully set, and Julian was about to walk through the front door. The kitchen door swung open violently. Vanessa burst back into the sweltering room, her face instantly twisting into a furious scowl. "Give me those trays right now!" she hissed, snatching the heavy silver platter directly from my hands. "Do not even think about stepping out there, Simone. If they see you sweating in that dirty apron, it will ruin the entire upper-class aesthetic I have carefully built for them." I released my grip on the silver handles, letting her take the heavy tray. My abdominal muscles screamed in protest from the sudden shift in weight, but I kept my face entirely blank. I stepped back and leaned heavily against the cool stainless steel refrigerator, pressing my hand over my fresh bandages. I watched her push the door open with her hip immediately adopting a high-pitched melodic laugh as she re-entered the dining room to present my hard work. I kept the door cracked open exactly 1 inch. I needed to hear every single word. Vanessa lowered the silver tray onto the center of the massive mahogany dining table. The wealthy corporate executives immediately stopped talking. A thick silence fell over the room as they stared down at the culinary masterpiece sitting in front of them. The delicate Wagyu beef tartare resting perfectly on the crispy brioche, and the golden Osetra caviar catching the light from the crystal chandelier above them. "Gentlemen, please enjoy this first course," Vanessa cooed, her voice dripping with artificial humility. "I know how stressful the corporate world can be, so I wanted to create an appetizer that would instantly transport you to a place of absolute relaxation and refinement." I heard the clinking of heavy silver forks against the imported porcelain plates. Then came the collective groans of pure culinary ecstasy. Mr. Harrington, the senior partner of the firm, was the first to speak. His voice was thick with absolute astonishment. "Good heavens, Trent, this is absolutely extraordinary. I have dined at Michelin-starred restaurants in Tokyo and London that could not produce a Wagyu tartare with this level of delicate precision. The balance of the truffle and the caviar is completely flawless." Mr. Vance chimed in eagerly. He sounded like a starving man who had just discovered water. "I must agree, Harrington. This is magnificent. Vanessa, my dear, where on earth did you learn to cook like this?" Vanessa did not miss a single beat. She possessed an alarming talent for lying effortlessly. "Oh, you are far too kind, gentlemen." She giggled softly, pouring them more expensive wine. "Cooking is simply my ultimate passion. I actually spent quite a bit of time studying culinary arts in Paris during my early 20s. I trained under some brilliant traditional French chefs in a tiny little bistro near the Seine River. They taught me that the secret to a perfect dish is an uncompromising dedication to high-quality ingredients and exact temperature control." I scoffed silently in the kitchen, pressing my forehead against the refrigerator door to distract myself from my physical pain. The only thing Vanessa studied in her early 20s was how to max out our mother's credit cards at the local shopping mall. She had never even owned a passport, let alone traveled to France. Trent seized the moment perfectly. He stood up at the head of the table holding his crystal wine glass in the air. "Well, gentlemen, I am a very lucky man," Trent boasted loudly, his voice swelling with arrogant pride. "My wife is a woman of exceptional taste and sophistication. I have always believed that the way a man manages his home and chooses his partner is a direct reflection of how he manages his business. I expect perfection in my personal life, and I bring that exact same standard of excellence to the Sterling Fund. This dinner is just a small taste of the premium experience I can offer our elite clients if I am promoted to managing director next quarter." The executives nodded in eager agreement, clearly intoxicated by the luxurious food and the expensive wine. "You make a very compelling argument, Trent," Mr. Harrington noted, tapping his fork against the plate. "The board is incredibly impressed with your recent portfolio acquisitions. But you know as well as I do that the final decision regarding your promotion and the new $50 million investment fund does not belong to us. Everything hinges entirely on the approval of our silent owner. He is an incredibly private billionaire, and his standards are notoriously impossible to meet. If he does not like you, Trent, Your career at this firm is effectively over. But if you can impress him tonight, the managing director position is yours." Trent laughed confidently, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "I am not worried in the slightest, Mr. Harrington. I know exactly how to handle high net worth individuals. Our billionaire owner will walk through that front door and he will immediately see that I am the absolute best asset this company has ever hired. Vanessa has prepared an unforgettable main course that will absolutely blow his mind. We are going to secure that $50 million investment tonight, and we are going to celebrate." Vanessa leaned over and kissed Trent on the cheek, playing the role of the supportive, loving wife perfectly. They were so incredibly confident. They were building a massive castle out of thin air, entirely supported by my physical labor and my recipes. I wiped another bead of cold sweat from my forehead. The pain in my stomach was reaching a severe, agonizing level, but my mind was completely sharp. Trent was currently leveraging my culinary genius to secure his corporate empire while simultaneously treating me like worthless trash in my own house. My mother was sitting in the other room, enabling his disgusting behavior. They had no idea that the notoriously private billionaire owner they were waiting to impress was the man they had insulted. I checked my phone. Julian is here. The heavy brass knocker on the front door sounded exactly 3 times, echoing with a commanding weight that instantly silenced the entire dining room. Trent nearly dropped his crystal wine glass. He scrambled out of his chair, smoothing his silk tie with visibly shaking hands. He practically sprinted out to the foyer, leaving his corporate bosses sitting in tense anticipation. I stood perfectly still in the kitchen, peering through the narrow crack in the door. I watched Trent pull the heavy oak door open and fold his body into a deep, reverent bow. Standing on the porch was the exact same man my sister had dismissed as a cheap Uber driver earlier. But Julian Sterling had completely shed his working-class disguise. He had slipped away to his waiting town car and changed into a magnificent custom-tailored Tom Ford suit that radiated absolute power and unimaginable wealth. The dark charcoal fabric draped flawlessly over his broad shoulders, and his gold cufflinks caught the warm light of the foyer chandelier. The faded baseball cap was gone, revealing his sharply styled hair, and his dark eyes burned with an icy, terrifying calm. "Welcome, Mr. Sterling." Trent stammered, his voice trembling with fear. "It is an absolute honor to welcome you to my home. We have been waiting eagerly for your arrival." Julian did not offer his hand for Trent to shake. He simply stepped past my arrogant brother-in-law, completely ignoring Trent's groveling display. Julian strode confidently into the formal dining room, and the sheer force of his presence sucked the remaining air right out of the room. Mr. Harrington and Mr. Vance immediately pushed their chairs back and stood up respectfully to greet their billionaire boss. They looked incredibly nervous, suddenly acting like eager schoolboys instead of powerful corporate executives. "Good evening, gentlemen," Julian said, his deep voice commanding absolute authority. "Please sit down. We have business to attend to." Trent scurried behind him, pulling out the massive velvet chair at the head of the mahogany table. Julian unbuttoned his suit jacket and sat down, moving with a deliberate, relaxed elegance. Trent scrambled back to his own seat, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Mr. Sterling," Trent began, his voice high and tight. "I wanted to personally introduce you to my beautiful wife, Vanessa. She spent the day preparing a 5-star culinary experience. She is a highly trained chef." Vanessa sat up incredibly straight, flashing Julian her most brilliant smile, completely unaware that she was smiling at the very same man she had insulted. Julian slowly turned his head to look directly at Vanessa. His expression was entirely unreadable, a blank slate of cold, calculating intelligence. He did not return her smile. He simply stared at her for a long, agonizing moment before shifting his gaze down to the delicate plate resting in front of him. The entire dining room held its collective breath. Trent looked like he was about to pass out from the intense pressure. I leaned closer to the crack in the kitchen door, ignoring the sharp, throbbing pain in my surgical wound. This was the exact moment I had been waiting for. Julian picked up his heavy silver fork. He moved with agonizing slowness, deliberately prolonging the suspense. He carefully pierced a small portion of the Wagyu beef, ensuring he captured a precise amount of the golden Osetra caviar and the truffle glaze. He brought the perfectly constructed bite to his mouth and tasted it. The silence in the room was so absolute you could hear the hum of the refrigerator behind me. Julian closed his eyes, appearing to analyze every single complex flavor profile unfolding on his palate. He chewed slowly, swallowed, and gently placed his silver fork back down onto the pristine white tablecloth. Fascinating. Julian finally spoke, his deep voice cutting through the thick tension. The flavor profile here is truly remarkable. The balance of the earthiness from the truffle against the rich, buttery texture of the Wagyu is quite extraordinary. Trent let out a massive sigh of relief, practically melting into his chair. "Thank you so much, Mr. Sterling." Trent beamed proudly. "As I was telling the board earlier, my wife possesses an unparalleled level of sophistication and culinary genius." Julian ignored Trent completely. His dark, piercing eyes remained locked entirely on Vanessa, who was glowing with stolen pride. "Tell me, Vanessa," Julian said, leaning forward slightly and resting his forearms on the table. "A dish of this caliber requires an incredible amount of technical precision. The beef is tender, but it maintains a specific structural integrity, preventing fat from rendering too quickly. I assume you used an immersion circulator to achieve this exact texture before assembling the tartare, correct?" Vanessa blinked rapidly, her smile faltering. She clearly had absolutely no idea what an immersion circulator even was, let alone how it functioned in a kitchen. "Oh yes, absolutely, Mr. Sterling." Vanessa lied, her voice pitching slightly higher with sudden nervous energy. "I use the circular thing exactly as I learned in Paris. It is all about the technique, you know." Julian tilted his head, a dangerous glint sparking in his eyes. "Excellent," he replied smoothly. "Then you can easily answer a very simple question for me. In order to achieve this precise level of enzymatic breakdown without denaturing the critical proteins, what exact temperature did you calibrate your sous vide water bath to, and how many minutes per ounce did you allow the meat to rest?" The color completely drained from Vanessa's face. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked frantically at Trent, who was staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. Mr. Harrington and Mr. Vance shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the panic washing over their hostess's face. "Well?" Vanessa. Julian pressed his tone, dropping into a cold, demanding register. "I am waiting. A master chef would know the formula." Vanessa began to stutter uncontrollably, grasping for excuses, her hands trembling violently in front of the board. I do not rely on strict numbers, Mr. Sterling," Vanessa babbled, her voice cracking under the immense pressure of his unyielding stare. "A true artist does not measure every single degree. I cook with intuition and passion. I felt the heat of the water, and I just knew when the meat was perfectly tender. It is a family secret technique that I developed over many years of practice." Julian stared at her with absolute disgust. He slowly picked up his heavy linen napkin and placed it firmly on the table. He pushed his plate away with deliberate force. "That is a fascinating explanation," Vanessa. Julian said, his voice completely devoid of any warmth or politeness. "However, it is also a complete fabrication. Sous vide cooking relies entirely on precise scientific measurements, not intuition. If you had guessed the water temperature, you would have either served me a raw piece of meat or a gray, rubbery disaster. This Wagyu is cooked to a flawless 54 degrees. Someone with decades of professional culinary training prepared this meal. And it certainly was not you." The silence in the dining room became suffocating. Trent turned a ghostly shade of pale. A thick bead of sweat rolled down his forehead, dripping onto his expensive silk collar. "Mr. Sterling, please," Trent begged, holding his hands up in a desperate, placating gesture. "My wife is just nervous. She is intimidated by your presence. I assure you she worked tirelessly all day in that hot kitchen." Julian did not even look at Trent, His dark eyes remained locked on Vanessa, who was now shrinking back into her velvet chair, looking like a terrified child caught in a massive lie. I do not tolerate liars in my personal life, and I certainly do not tolerate them in my business, Julian stated flatly. The foundation of any successful investment is absolute transparency. If you are willing to look me in the eye and lie about something as trivial as preparing a meal, I cannot possibly trust you with $50 million of my capital. Mr. Harrington and Mr. Vance exchanged panicked glances, realizing that their massive corporate deal was rapidly disintegrating right before their eyes. Julian leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his broad chest. I will not eat another bite of this food, and I will not sign a single document until the actual chef who prepared this masterpiece comes out here to accept the proper credit. Bring the real chef to this table, Trent. Right now. Trent swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously in his throat. Of course, Mr. Sterling, Trent stammered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. I will go check the kitchen immediately. Please excuse me for just one moment, gentlemen. Trent pushed his chair back so violently it nearly tipped over. He practically sprinted across the formal dining room, his heavy footsteps echoing frantically against the hardwood floor. I was standing in the sweltering kitchen, leaning heavily against the stainless steel refrigerator. The pain in my abdomen had escalated into a relentless, agonizing throb. My fresh surgical wound was burning, and I could feel the warm dampness of blood soaking through the thick gauze bandages beneath my cotton dress. I closed my eyes, taking short, shallow breaths to keep myself from passing out. The kitchen door suddenly flew open, crashing violently against the wall. Trent stormed into the room, his face completely red with absolute unhinged fury. He looked like a cornered animal, desperate and dangerous. He marched straight toward me, closing the distance between us in 2 massive strides. Before I could even brace myself, Trent reached out and grabbed my left arm. His large fingers dug brutally into my bicep, exactly where he had bruised me earlier. I let out a sharp gasp of pain, stumbling forward as he yanked me away from the refrigerator. What did you do? Trent hissed, his voice a venomous whisper as he shook me violently. Did you purposefully make this meal too complicated? Did you set my wife up to look like a complete fool in front of Julian Sterling? You vindictive little brat? I struggled against his crushing grip, trying to protect my bleeding stomach. I did exactly what you demanded, Trent, I whispered through gritted teeth. You told me to cook a 5-star meal for billionaires. You are the one who let Vanessa lie about it. Do not you dare blame me for your own pathetic arrogance. Trent's eyes widened with pure rage. He grabbed my other arm, pinning me tightly against the cold granite island. His face was mere inches from mine, and I could smell the stale wine on his breath. You listen to me very carefully, Simone, he growled, his voice vibrating with lethal intent. My entire career is on the line right now. The managing director promotion and the $50 million fund are slipping through my fingers because of you. Julian Sterling is demanding to meet the real chef, so you are going to walk through those doors and you are going to fix this massive disaster. He released my right arm just long enough to grab the collar of my dress, twisting the fabric tightly in his fist. You will walk out there and you will introduce yourself as Vanessa's humble sous chef. Trent commanded, his eyes wild with desperation. You will tell Mr. Sterling that Vanessa created the entire menu and developed all the recipes. You will tell him that you just followed her brilliant instructions because you are nothing but hired help. You will smile, you will apologize for the confusion, and you will give my wife all the credit. If you refuse, I swear to God, I will ruin your miserable life, he spat. I will throw you out tonight and ensure your pathetic business is destroyed. You will have nothing. Do you understand me? I stared back at him, completely unafraid. I pushed open the wooden dining room door. The heavy oak swung wide, revealing the bright crystal chandelier light to my tired eyes. I stepped out from the shadows of the sweltering kitchen and directly into the formal dining space. The contrast between my appearance and the elegant setting was incredibly stark. I was wearing a simple cotton dress that was clinging to my sweating skin. The heavy canvas apron tied around my waist was stained with dark truffle sauce, and a faint bloom of red blood was beginning to show through the fabric right over my surgical wound. I was pale, exhausted, and physically trembling from the sheer effort of standing upright. But I kept my chin lifted high, holding my shoulders back with absolute defiance. I refused to look like a victim. I refused to let them break my spirit. Trent followed closely behind me, stepping out from the kitchen with a tight, artificial smile plastered across his sweating face. He immediately raised his hands, attempting to command the attention of the room and salvage his crumbling corporate deal. "Gentlemen, please allow me to introduce Simone Trent," announced his voice dripping with condescending fake charm. "She is Vanessa's humble sous chef, and the hired help we brought in to assist with the heavy lifting in the kitchen today. She is a lovely girl, but she is just following my wife's brilliant culinary directions." Vanessa let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh, gripping her wine glass so tightly her knuckles turned completely white. "Yes, she is just my assistant," Vanessa chimed in, her eyes darting frantically toward Julian. "She gets a little confused sometimes, but she is a hard worker." Trent stepped forward, reaching out to grab my shoulder and force me into a subservient posture in front of his billionaire boss. "Say hello to Mr. Sterling, Simone," Trent hissed under his breath, his fingers grazing my arm. "Apologize for the confusion and tell him how much you admire Vanessa's recipes." Before Trent could even clamp his hand down onto my shoulder, Julian moved. He did not just stand up, he erupted from his chair at the head of the table with a terrifying sudden speed that made both Mr. Harrington and Mr. Vance physically flinch. The heavy wooden legs of Julian's chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. Julian completely ignored Trent. He walked right past my arrogant brother-in-law, treating him like an invisible, pathetic obstacle. Trent froze, his hands suspended in midair, his fake smile completely melting off his face. Julian closed the distance between us in 2 long strides. His dark eyes softened the moment he looked at me, instantly recognizing the physical pain I was desperately trying to hide. He reached out and gently placed his warm hands over my trembling shoulders, offering me a silent anchor of support. Julian did not ask me to speak or apologize. Instead, he gently guided me away from Trent and led me directly to the head of the mahogany table. He pulled out the massive velvet chair situated immediately to his right. It was the seat of absolute honor, a place reserved only for the most respected VIP guest in the room. "Please sit down," Julian murmured, his voice incredibly gentle and protective. "You have pushed yourself entirely too hard today." I sank into the soft velvet cushion, letting out a long, shaky breath as the agonizing pressure on my abdomen finally eased. I rested my hands on the pristine white tablecloth, ignoring the horrified stares of my sister and her husband. Julian remained standing tall and imposing right beside my chair. He slowly turned to face the rest of the dining room. The icy, lethal calm had returned to his eyes as he looked directly at Trent, who was now standing completely frozen near the kitchen door. "Gentlemen," Julian addressed the table, his deep voice vibrating with absolute authority. "I would like to correct a massive and highly offensive misunderstanding. The woman sitting beside me is not hired help. She is certainly not Vanessa's humble assistant. I would like you all to meet Executive Chef Simone. She is the sole creator and owner of the magnificent recipe you just enjoyed. More importantly, she is the majority shareholder and the brilliant visionary behind my entire global hospitality group." The collective shock that slammed into the room was almost a tangible physical force. Mr. Harrington dropped his heavy silver fork, entirely letting it clatter loudly against his porcelain plate. Mr. Vance practically choked on his expensive red wine, coughing and sputtering as he stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. They instantly recognized that they had just eaten a meal prepared by their billionaire boss, equal business partner, while simultaneously allowing her to be treated like a lowly servant. But the reaction from Trent and Vanessa was an absolute masterpiece of sheer, unadulterated devastation. Trent looked as though he had just been struck by a high-speed freight train. His jaw went completely slack, his mouth hanging open in silent, horrified disbelief. The color drained from his face at a sickening speed, leaving his skin a pale, sickly shade of gray. He stared at me and then stared at Julian, completely unable to process the words he had just heard. The woman he had relentlessly mocked, insulted, and physically threatened all afternoon was the literal key to the $50 million investment he was desperately begging for. He had just demanded that a multi-million-dollar restaurant mogul introduce herself as his wife's pathetic assistant. Vanessa was completely paralyzed in her chair. The smug, arrogant mask she had worn her entire life shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Her eyes darted wildly between my stained canvas apron and the custom-tailored Tom Ford suit Julian was wearing. The sickening realization hit her with the brutal force of a physical blow. The incredibly powerful man sitting at the head of her dining table, the billionaire investor her husband worshipped, was the exact same man she had viciously degraded on her front porch just 3 hours ago. She had called him a cheap Uber driver. She had threatened to call the neighborhood security on him. She had told him to get his poor broke self off her expensive property. And now she realized that he was not just a billionaire, he was my closest ally and my fierce protector. "You are lying," Vanessa suddenly blurted out, her voice cracking hysterically. "This is a joke. This is some kind of sick joke." Simone flips burgers. She does cheap urban catering. She does not own a hospitality group. She dropped out of college. Julian turned his piercing gaze toward my sister, and the sheer contempt in his eyes made her physically recoil. "She does not flip burgers, Vanessa." Julian stated, his voice dripping with lethal precision. "She stepped away from traditional college to build an empire. She caters exclusive private events for athletes, politicians, and royalty. She owns 40% of my international portfolio. She is worth more than this entire investment firm combined. And she prepared this flawless meal while bleeding from major surgery because she wanted to see exactly how far your disgusting toxic jealousy would go." The absolute silence that followed his declaration was deafening. The trap had snapped entirely shut, and there was absolutely no escape for them. Vanessa let out a sharp, breathless laugh that sounded more like a panicked wheeze. She clutched her expensive crystal wine glass so tightly her knuckles appeared completely translucent against the harsh dining room lighting. "Oh, Mr. Sterling, you are so incredibly funny," Vanessa stammered, forcing a wide, terrifyingly unnatural smile onto her face. "You really had us all completely fooled for a second there. I see what is happening now. Trent told you that I have a great sense of humor, so you decided to play a little practical joke on us to break the corporate ice. That is so clever. Simone owning a hospitality group and being your equal partner. That is honestly the most hilarious thing I have heard all year. My sister is just a simple cook who helps me out sometimes when I feel overwhelmed. She did not even graduate from a real university. She definitely does not own anything." Vanessa looked around the table, desperately searching for anyone to join her delusional laughter. But the room remained deathly silent. Mr. Harrington and Mr. Vance stared at her with expressions of absolute stone. Julian did not even blink. He simply tilted his head, watching her unravel with the cold, clinical fascination of a predator observing cornered prey. The complete lack of amusement in his dark eyes finally made Vanessa's frantic laughter die in her throat. She swallowed hard, her chest heaving as the horrific reality began to suffocate her. I slowly reached my hand into the deep front pocket of my stained canvas apron. My fingers brushed against the folded stack of thick paper I had been carrying all afternoon. I pulled out the long, itemized grocery receipts from the premium organic butcher and the international specialty food importer. I leaned forward, ignoring the sharp burning sensation radiating from my surgical wound, and tossed the crumpled papers directly onto Vanessa's empty porcelain plate. The receipts landed with a soft, defining thud that echoed loudly in the quiet room. "Take a very close look at those receipts, Vanessa," I said, my voice dangerously calm and steady. Every single ounce of that grade A5 Japanese Wagyu beef, every single gram of the imported Italian black truffles, and every single pearl of that golden Osetra caviar was paid for entirely by me. If you look at the bottom of the long receipt, you will clearly see the last 4 digits of my personal American Express black card. The total bill for the ingredients of your spectacular culinary masterpiece was exactly $8,000. You did not contribute a single penny to this meal. You did not even know how to pronounce the name of the caviar you just proudly served to these men. Vanessa stared down at the receipts as if they were venomous snakes. Her lower lip trembled, but she could not find a single word to speak. I pushed myself up slightly in my velvet chair, making sure I addressed the entire table. My sister has spent her entire adult life curating a pathetic illusion. I continued projecting my voice so it carried clearly to the terrified corporate executives sitting across from me. She loves to post glamorous photos on her social media accounts, pretending she lives a life of absolute luxury and sophisticated elegance. She told you gentlemen that she studied culinary arts at a quaint little bistro in Paris during her 20s. That is a magnificent lie. Vanessa has never even owned a passport. The closest she has ever been to France is buying a stale croissant at the local strip mall bakery. I turned my head and looked directly into Vanessa's panicked eyes. You dragged a massive ring light into my kitchen today while I was bleeding and working over a hot stove. I exposed methodically, peeling back every single layer of her fake existence. You recorded dozens of videos pretending to stir my sauces and season my meat so you could harvest praise from complete strangers on the internet. You claimed my decades of intense professional training as your own simply because you believe my sole purpose in this family is to make you look flawless. You have always believed that because I chose a different path than your corporate husband, I am somehow completely beneath you. The air in the room grew incredibly heavy. Mr. Harrington slowly set his wine glass down, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unfiltered disgust. He looked at Vanessa as if she were a piece of rotting garbage left on his immaculate dining table. To lie about your credentials is one thing, Mr. Harrington muttered, his voice thick with genuine revulsion. But to humiliate your own sister and steal her professional work to impress a group of investors is absolutely despicable behavior. I have never witnessed such a profound lack of basic human decency in my entire long career. But that is not even the worst part of her performance tonight, I said, my voice dropping an octave, commanding the absolute attention of the room. I slowly reached down and placed my hand gently over my stomach. Just 24 hours ago, I was lying on an operating table, having my gallbladder surgically removed. I was officially discharged from the hospital this morning with strict medical instructions to remain on bed rest for at least an entire week. But the moment I walked through the front door of this house, my sister threw this dirty canvas apron directly into my face. She demanded that I stand on my feet for 6 agonizing hours in a sweltering kitchen to cook a feast for her husband's corporate bosses. A collective gasp of genuine horror rippled through the dining room. Mr. Vance actually covered his mouth with his hand, his eyes widening in absolute shock. Julian remained perfectly still, but a muscle ticked dangerously in his tight jaw. The two powerful investors slowly turned to look at Vanessa with an expression of pure, absolute, and total disgust. Trent could no longer contain his mounting panic. He slammed his fist down onto the heavy mahogany table, causing the crystal wine glasses to rattle. "Shut your mouth right now, Simone," he bellowed, his face twisting into pure desperation. "You have said more than enough. I will not sit here and allow a jealous, mentally unstable college dropout to ruin this important evening. I am the host of this dinner and a senior executive at a top-tier investment firm. You have no right to speak to my guests in this disrespectful manner. Get out of my dining room immediately before I personally drag you out the front door." He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the booming corporate persona he used to intimidate junior analysts at his office. He turned toward Mr. Harrington and Mr. Vance, offering a frantic, pleading smile. Gentlemen, please accept my apologies for this ridiculous outburst, Trent stammered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. My sister-in-law has always harbored a deeply disturbed resentment toward Vanessa and me. She is clearly having a psychological breakdown. I assure you this pathetic display has no bearing on my professional capabilities or my readiness to manage the new $50 million fund. Julian let out a low, dark chuckle that sent an instant shiver down my spine. The sound was devoid of humor, echoing through the room like the sharp scrape of a blade against stone. You truly are a pathetic excuse for a man, Trent. Julian said, his voice dropping into a lethal, quiet tone that forced Trent to snap his mouth shut. You stand there hiding behind cheap corporate arrogance, barking orders at a woman who possesses 10 times your intelligence and 100 times your worth. You think your little executive title gives you ultimate power to abuse people in your home. But you are operating under a massive delusion. Trent swallowed hard, his confidence evaporating under Julian's relentless stare. Mr. Sterling, I am just trying to maintain order, Trent pleaded, his voice shrinking into a pathetic whine. I am a dedicated company man. I know how to manage difficult situations. Please just give me the opportunity to prove my value to your investment fund. Julian slowly reached inside the breast pocket of his custom-tailored suit jacket. He withdrew a sleek black leather phone and placed it deliberately onto the table. I did not come to your house tonight to evaluate your potential to manage a new investment fund, Julian announced, his words cutting through the air with surgical precision. I certainly did not come here to be entertained by your disgusting display of domestic abuse. I came here tonight simply to watch the spectacular collapse of your pathetic ego in person. Mr. Harrington and Mr. Vance shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but they remained silent, deferring entirely to their billionaire superior. Trent looked frantically between the three men, his heart hammering so loudly against his ribs, I could practically hear it from across the table. What do you mean? Mr. Sterling Trent whispered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. We have been preparing for this funding meeting for 6 entire months. The board assured me that my promotion to managing director was directly tied to securing your capital tonight. Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows gracefully on the edge of the mahogany table. Your board of directors is no longer in charge, Trent. Julian explained, his voice carrying the finality of an executioner swinging an axe. I decided that simply investing $50 million into your firm was far too passive for my current business strategy. I prefer to maintain absolute control over my financial assets. At exactly 9 o'clock this morning, while you were busy barking orders at my business partner over a hot stove, my legal team successfully finalized a hostile takeover. I did not just invest in your firm, Trent. I bought the entire controlling stake. As of this morning, I am the sole majority owner of the company. I am your absolute boss. The air was instantly sucked out of the room. Trent stumbled backward, his knees buckling until the back of his legs hit his velvet dining chair. He collapsed into the seat, staring at Julian with wide, terrified eyes. A hostile takeover, Trent mumbled, his voice barely audible. But the senior partners did not say anything to me. I am a top earner. I bring in millions. You bring in nothing of value, Julian corrected him sharply. I ordered Mr. Harrington and Mr. Vance to keep the acquisition strictly confidential until I had the opportunity to attend this little dinner party. I wanted to see exactly what kind of man you were outside the office. You have thoroughly proven yourself to be a racist, abusive, arrogant fraud. You rely entirely on forged narratives and stolen labor to prop up your pathetic existence. You are a complete liability to my new corporate structure. Trent began to hyperventilate, his hands shaking violently as he reached toward Julian in a desperate begging gesture. Please, Mr. Sterling, you cannot do this, Trent cried, tears of genuine panic welling in his eyes. I have a massive mortgage to pay. I have a certain lifestyle to maintain. Vanessa needs allowances. If you give me one more chance, I swear I will do whatever you want. I will work 80 hours a week. Julian stood up to his full imposing height, casting a long, dark shadow across Trent's crumbling world. You will not work a single minute for my company ever again, Julian declared, his voice echoing with absolute brutal authority. You are officially terminated, Trent, effective immediately. You are stripped of your senior executive title. You are stripped of your exorbitant salary. You will not receive a severance package, and I will personally ensure that every major financial institution in this city knows exactly why you were fired. Now just shut your mouth and watch your fake life burn. Trent shot up from his velvet chair, his face contorted in a desperate rage. You cannot do this to me, he screamed, his voice cracking as he slammed his hands flat onto the mahogany table. I have a binding employment contract, Mr. Sterling. You cannot just waltz in here and terminate a senior executive without a legitimate cause. I will sue you for wrongful termination. I will drag this firm through court and expose you. Julian did not even flinch at Trent's pathetic outburst. He calmly adjusted the cuff of his jacket and turned his head slightly toward the dark hallway. You want a legitimate cause, Trent? Julian asked, his voice dropping into a deadly monotone. Then let us give you exactly what you asked for. Julian raised his right hand and snapped his fingers once. From the shadows of the hallway, a tall woman wearing a sharp gray business suit stepped into the dining room. It was Julian's executive assistant. She carried a thick stack of heavy black folders under her arm. She walked purposefully around the table and placed one folder directly in front of Mr. Harrington and another in front of Mr. Vance. She then placed the thickest folder right in the center of the table directly in front of Trent. Open them, Julian commanded. Mr. Harrington opened the cover of his folder, pulling out a stack of printed documents. Mr. Vance did the same, his eyes scanning the first page rapidly. These are the preliminary findings from a comprehensive forensic audit I ordered on your specific department, Trent Julian explained. My team of independent accountants has been secretly reviewing your transaction history for the past 72 hours. What they discovered was not a brilliant corporate strategist. Julian continued, his voice echoing coldly. They discovered a desperate, pathetic thief. Mr. Harrington gasped loudly, dropping the paper onto the table as if it had physically burned him. Good Lord, Trent, Mr. Harrington whispered, his voice trembling with genuine shock. You diverted over $300,000 from the secondary client accounts. You funneled the money through a shell corporation registered under your wife's maiden name. Trent began shaking violently. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He stared at the damning paperwork sitting in front of him, paralyzed. Vanessa suddenly let out a shriek. A shell corporation, she cried, her eyes darting between Trent and the board members. I do not know anything about a shell corporation. Trent told me he got a massive bonus last year. He told me the firm paid for my new luxury SUV and my designer bags. He told you a massive lie, Vanessa. I interjected, my voice steady and completely devoid of any sympathy. He stole that money to fund your ridiculous obsession with looking wealthy on the internet. You wanted the European cars and the custom jewelry and the expensive vacations to impress your social media followers. Trent could not afford any of it on his actual salary, so he resorted to committing federal crimes just to keep you happy. You built your entire fake upper-class aesthetic using stolen corporate funds. Mr. Vance pushed his chair away from the table. I cannot believe we trusted you. Mr. Vance spat, his face red with fury. You sat in our board meetings demanding a promotion while you were actively robbing our clients blind. You are a disgrace to this industry. I will personally testify against you when this goes to trial. Trent lunged forward, trying to grab the folders off the table. This is a mistake, he babbled frantically. These numbers are wrong. The accountants made an error. I can explain all of this. I was just borrowing the funds to cover a temporary cash flow issue. I swear to you, gentlemen, I am not a thief. I am a loyal employee. Julian stepped forward, slamming his large hand down onto the stack of papers, stopping Trent from destroying the evidence. You do not borrow client funds to buy your wife a $60,000 diamond bracelet? Julian stated, his voice radiating pure menace. You committed wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. You have been running a pathetic little Ponzi scheme right under the noses of your superiors. You are not a successful businessman, Trent. You are a common criminal wearing an expensive suit. The reality of his situation finally crushed Trent completely. His legs gave out and he collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his shaking hands. A sob tore from his throat. His entire identity as a powerful, wealthy corporate executive had just been dismantled and destroyed in front of the very people he tried to impress. Vanessa was hyperventilating, clutching her chest as she stared at the man she had married for his money. "You ruined everything!" Vanessa screamed at him, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You told me we were rich. You told me we were part of the elite. You lied to me." She turned to Mr. Harrington, her face pleading. "Please, you have to believe me. I had absolutely no idea he was stealing money. I am a victim here too. I thought he was just a brilliant investor." Mr. Harrington looked at my sister with an expression of sheer disgust. "You are no victim, Vanessa," he said coldly. "You are complicit. You paraded around this house tonight wearing stolen goods while forcing your bleeding sister to cook for us. You and your husband deserve exactly what is coming to you." Julian picked up his phone from the table and slipped it back into his pocket. "My legal team has already forwarded copies of these forensic audit reports to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the local authorities," Julian informed the room, his tone casual, for delivering such devastating news. "I highly suggest you retain a criminal defense attorney, Trent. You are going to need one before the sun comes up." Trent just sobbed louder, broken and utterly defeated. The sound of Trent sobbing into his hands echoed pitifully across the dining room. But before the sheer weight of his absolute ruin could fully settle over the table, a sudden commotion erupted from the hallway. My mother Brenda came storming through the archway, her face flushed with indignant rage. She had been eavesdropping from the living room the entire time, completely oblivious to the complex corporate jargon and the severity of the federal crimes being discussed. All she understood was that her precious golden child was crying and her perfect wealthy white son-in-law was being threatened. She marched straight up to the mahogany table, her high heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor, and positioned herself protectively behind Trent's chair. She placed her hands on his shaking shoulders and glared at Julian with pure venom. "You cannot do this to him!" My mother shrieked, her voice trembling with misplaced righteous fury. "I do not care who you think you are or how much money you have. You cannot just march into this home and destroy a good man's life based on some ridiculous accounting mistake. Trent is an honest, hard-working provider. He is a pillar of our church community." Julian did not even blink at her sudden intrusion. He simply watched her make a complete fool of herself with the same cold, clinical detachment he had shown Trent. My mother turned her burning glare toward me, pointing an accusing finger right at my face. "And you, Simone," she spat, her voice dripping with disgust. "How dare you bring this arrogant man into this house to humiliate your sister and her husband? You have always been jealous of Vanessa's perfect life. You have always wanted to ruin her happiness just because you are a miserable failure. But I will not stand here and allow you to bite the hand that feeds you. Trent is a saint for putting up with your pathetic attitude. He pays the mortgage on this massive estate every single month without ever complaining. He keeps a roof over your head. If it were not for his incredible generosity, you would be out on the street right now. You are going to apologize to him, and then you and your vicious little friend are going to pack your things and get out of his house." I slowly stood up from my velvet chair. The sudden movement sent another sharp, burning spike of pain radiating through my surgical wound, but the adrenaline pumping through my veins masked the worst of the agony. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life belittling me, comparing me, and treating me like an unwanted burden. I had spent 34 years desperately craving her approval and validation, but in that exact moment, every single ounce of my childhood longing completely evaporated. I felt nothing but absolute pity for her pathetic delusion. I reached into the deep front pocket of my stained canvas apron one final time. My fingers bypassed the remaining culinary tools and grasped a thick, folded envelope made of heavy parchment paper. I pulled it out and slapped it down onto the table right next to the damning forensic audit reports Julian had provided. "That is not Trent's house, Mom," I said, my voice ringing with a cold, absolute certainty that made the crystal glasses vibrate. "And he is not a generous saint. He is a pathetic parasite who has been feeding off your desperate need for upper-class validation." My mother scoffed loudly, crossing her arms over her chest. "What kind of ridiculous lie are you trying to spin now, Simone?" she mocked, rolling her eyes. "I have seen the bank statements with my own two eyes. Trent shows me the mortgage payment confirmation every single month. He handles all the financial paperwork because he knows how to deal with those big corporate banks. You do not know the first thing about real estate or high finance." I pushed the heavy parchment envelope across the smooth, polished surface of the mahogany table until it stopped right in front of her. "Open it," I commanded. "Read the official county seal on the front page. Read the name printed on the property deed." My mother hesitated, her arrogant smirk faltering slightly under the intense weight of my unrelenting stare. She slowly reached out with a trembling hand and pulled the heavy document from the envelope. She unfolded the crisp pages, her eyes scanning the dense legal text. The silence in the dining room was suffocating. I watched the color rapidly drain from her face as she read the words over and over again, completely unable to process the absolute truth staring back at her. "This property has never had a mortgage," I explained, speaking very slowly so every single word would penetrate her thick wall of denial. "I bought this entire estate 5 years ago. I paid for it fully in cash using the massive profits from my hospitality group. Look at the deed, Mom. My name is the only name listed on that legal document. I own the land. I own the house. I own the very floor you are standing on right now. I let you and Vanessa live here completely rent-free because despite how horribly you treated me, I still felt a pathetic obligation to take care of my family. But Trent did not just move into my house and pretend he was the generous provider. He used my property to run a sickening scam on you." My mother looked up from the deed, her eyes wide with a terrifying new confusion. "Scam?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "What do you mean, scam?" "Trent showed me the mortgage bills. He took my retirement money to pay the bank. He said he was helping me." Trent let out another pathetic sob, burying his face deeper into his shaking hands. I took a deep breath. "I am telling you the absolute truth right now. I am telling you the absolute truth right now. 5 years ago, when I saw you struggling to keep up with the rent, I decided to buy this property for you. I wanted to give you and Vanessa a safe place to live, but I knew you would never accept such a massive gift from me, because you always viewed me as a failure. So I hired a private real estate attorney to handle the transaction quietly. I allowed you to believe that you were just renting a nicer house. But then Vanessa married Trent. He is a senior executive at a massive investment firm, so he naturally dug into the financial records of this property. He quickly discovered that there was no landlord and there was no rent. He found out that I owned the house outright. Instead of telling you the truth, Trent saw the perfect opportunity to exploit your absolute blind trust in him. He knew that you idolized him. He knew that you bragged to your church friends about having a wealthy white son-in-law who worked in high finance. So he manufactured a fake mortgage document. He sat you down and told you that the landlord was selling the house, but he had stepped in to secure a mortgage to save your home. He told you that he just needed a little bit of help with the down payment. My mother began shaking her head slowly, refusing to process the horrifying reality. "No," she whispered, her voice fragile and hollow. "Trent would never do that to me. He is a good Christian man. He took my retirement fund to protect my future. I gave him the $100,000 my late husband left me so we could keep this beautiful house. He showed me the bank receipts. He showed me the official papers every single month. Those papers were forged," I stated coldly. "I had Julian run a background check on Trent's personal finances alongside the corporate audit. Trent was desperate for liquid cash. He was stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Sterling Fund to buy Vanessa luxury cars and designer clothes, but the corporate accountants were starting to ask questions. He needed a massive influx of untraceable cash to cover the holes he was leaving in his client accounts. Your retirement fund was the perfect, easy target. He did not use your $100,000 to pay a fake mortgage. He used your life savings to cover his tracks and delay his inevitable arrest. You handed over your entire financial safety net to a desperate criminal because he wore an expensive suit, and you wanted to show him off to your friends. Trent squeezed his eyes shut, his face buried in his hands as he let out another pathetic sob. He did not deny a single word I said. His silence was the ultimate confession. But the final devastating blow had not even landed yet. I turned my attention away from the broken man and focused entirely on my sister, who was trying to shrink back into the shadows. And the most disgusting part of this entire sickening scam, I continued raising my voice so it commanded the attention of everyone in the room, is that Vanessa knew about the fake mortgage the entire time. My mother gasped sharply, clutching her pearl necklace as if she were suddenly struggling to breathe. She turned slowly to look at her beautiful, perfect golden child. Vanessa stared back at our mother, her face pale and her eyes wide with absolute panic. "Mom, I can explain," Vanessa stammered, taking a step backward. "It was not like that. Trent just needed a little bit of help. He promised he would pay you back as soon as his massive bonus came through. We just needed to keep up appearances for his corporate clients. You know how important his career is. You helped him steal my money." My mother whispered, her voice breaking into a devastated sob. "You sat at my kitchen table and held my hand while I signed over everything your father worked his entire life to save. You told me it was the smartest financial decision I could ever make. You let him take everything I had just so you could buy another expensive handbag." Vanessa began to cry, genuine tears of panic streaming down her perfectly contoured face. "Mom, please, you have to understand," Vanessa pleaded. "We were under so much pressure. Simone is just trying to turn you against me. She is jealous." My mother did not even hear Vanessa's pathetic excuses. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal finally crushed her entirely, the absolute foundation of her arrogant, judgmental world completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Her perfect son-in-law was a common thief. Her beautiful golden child was a manipulative accomplice who had actively participated in robbing her blind. And the daughter she had treated like worthless garbage for 34 years was the only reason she had not been sleeping on the street. My mother let out a loud, agonizing wail of pure heartbreak. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she collapsed heavily into the nearest velvet dining chair. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as the devastating reality of her absolute ruin washed over her. Mr. Harrington and Mr. Vance watched the entire family collapse with expressions of sheer, horrified disgust. Julian remained standing tall and imposing, his dark eyes completely devoid of any pity. He checked his expensive watch casually. "Right on time," Julian murmured, his deep voice cutting through the sound of my mother's loud, hysterical sobbing. The heavy silence that followed his words was suddenly broken by a harsh, blaring sound coming from outside. I looked toward the large front windows of the dining room. Flashing red and blue lights were violently cutting through the darkness of the front lawn. The police had finally arrived to collect their absolute prize. The strobing red and blue lights bathed the formal dining room in a chaotic, unnatural glow, casting long, shifting shadows across the terrified faces of my family. The heavy brass knocker on the front door did not sound this time. Instead, a series of loud, aggressive pounds echoed through the foyer, demanding immediate entry. Trent physically recoiled from the sound, pressing his back so hard against his velvet chair that I thought the wood might snap. He looked like a cornered animal, realizing there was absolutely no escape from the trap he had built for himself. Julian did not even turn his head toward the noise. He simply nodded to his executive assistant, who turned on her heel and walked calmly down the hallway to unlock the front door. The heavy oak swung open, and heavy-booted footsteps instantly filled the house. 3 uniformed police officers and 2 plainclothes detectives strode directly into the dining room, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. The lead detective, a tall, imposing man with a stern expression, scanned the room before locking his eyes directly onto the sweating, trembling man sitting at the head of the table. Trent William Sterling. The detective asked, his voice carrying a sharp, authoritative edge that completely shattered the luxurious illusion of the dinner party. Trent swallowed hard, his throat making a loud clicking sound in the deadly quiet room. "Yes," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "I am Trent Sterling. But there has to be some kind of massive misunderstanding here, officer. I am a senior executive at a highly respected financial institution. We are in the middle of a private corporate dinner with my board of directors. You cannot just barge into my private residence and interrupt a $50 million negotiation." Trent puffed out his chest, attempting to summon the arrogant white privilege that had protected him his entire life. He honestly believed his expensive tailored suit and his prestigious job title would make the police bow to him and apologize for the inconvenience. He expected them to treat him with the utmost respect simply because he lived in a wealthy neighborhood. The lead detective did not look impressed. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and stepped closer to the table. "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Sterling," the detective stated coldly. "I have a federal warrant for your arrest. You are being charged with multiple counts of corporate embezzlement, felony wire fraud, and grand larceny. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." Trent shook his head frantically, his perfectly styled blonde hair falling wildly across his forehead. "No!" he shouted, panic finally stripping away his polished corporate facade entirely. "No, you cannot do this to me. I have rights. I demand to call my lawyer immediately. I did not steal anything. The money was just resting in a different account. I was going to put it all back." His pathetic confession echoed through the dining room, cementing his guilt in front of his billionaire boss and his senior partners. The detective did not hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing Trent by the bicep and violently pulling him out of his velvet chair. Trent yelped in pain as the officer spun him around, forcefully pressing him chest first against the expensive mahogany dining table. The pristine white tablecloth bunched up under his weight, knocking over a crystal wine glass that shattered loudly onto the hardwood floor. The sharp metallic clicking sound of the heavy steel handcuffs locking around Trent's wrists cut through the air like a final brutal judgment. His arms were pinned tightly behind his back, stripping him of every single ounce of power and authority he had ever wielded over me. Trent began to sob hysterically, his chest heaving against the polished wood of the table. He turned his head frantically, looking desperately at his corporate bosses. "Mr. Harrington, please." Trent begged, his face wet with tears and sweat. "Tell them who I am. Tell them I am a vital part of your firm. You know my character. You know I would never intentionally defraud our clients. I am a good man." Mr. Harrington looked down at Trent with an expression of pure, unadulterated revulsion. "You are a criminal, Trent," Mr. Harrington replied, his voice dripping with venom. "You disgust me. You will never work in finance again, and I hope they lock you away for a very long time." Seeing that his board of directors had completely abandoned him, Trent twisted his head to look at the billionaire sitting calmly at the table. "Mr. Sterling, please." Trent wailed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic shriek. "You have all the power here. You own the firm now. You can stop this. I will sign whatever you want. I will be your slave. I will work for free until every single penny is paid back. Please do not let them take me to jail. I cannot survive in a prison cell. Please have mercy on me." Julian Sterling did not even blink at the desperate, pathetic pleas of the man begging for his life. He simply reached out with elegant precision and picked up his crystal glass of expensive red wine. He brought the glass to his lips, taking a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the complex vintage, while the police tightened their grip on his former employee. He lowered the glass and finally looked Trent directly in the eyes. "I do not show mercy to men who abuse women in my presence," Julian stated, his voice a quiet, lethal purr. Take this trash out of my sight, detective. My legal team will provide the full forensic audit to the district attorney in the morning. The officers yanked Trent away from the table, dragging his stumbling, sobbing body across the room. Vanessa screamed loudly, and my mother's desperate cries grew much louder, but their perfect golden boy was completely gone from our lives forever now. The heavy oak front door slammed shut behind the police officers, cutting off Trent's pathetic wailing. The sudden silence that fell over the foyer was heavy and suffocating. Vanessa was curled up on the hardwood floor, clutching her knees to her chest and rocking back and forth in a state of absolute shock. My mother remained frozen in the velvet dining chair, her face buried in her hands, as her entire manufactured reality crumbled into dust. She slowly lowered her hands, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks. Her eyes darted around the room, completely lost until they finally landed on me. For the first time in my entire life, she did not look at me with disgust or disappointment. She looked at me with pure desperation. "Simone?" She whimpered, her voice trembling as she pushed herself up from the chair. She stumbled toward me, reaching out with both arms as if she wanted to pull me into a tight embrace. "Oh, my sweet girl, I am so incredibly sorry. I had absolutely no idea he was a monster. You have to believe me, Simone. Trent tricked all of us. He manipulated me. We are victims here. Please forgive me, honey. We are family, and we have to stick together now more than ever." I did not let her touch me. As she lunged forward to wrap her arms around my shoulders, I took a deliberate step backward. Her hands grasped empty air, and she stumbled slightly, her face twisting in confusion and fresh tears. "Do not call me your sweet girl," I said, my voice dangerously low and completely devoid of any affection. "Do not try to rewrite history just because your golden ticket just got dragged out of here in handcuffs. You are not a victim, Mom. You are an active participant in my abuse." My mother let out a sharp gasp, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. "Simone, how can you say that?" She cried, tears streaming down her face. "I am your mother. I have always loved you." "You never loved me," I replied, my words cutting through the air like a surgical blade. "You loved the idea of having a perfect family to show off to your friends at church. You loved Vanessa because she was born with lighter skin and looser curls. You treated her like a delicate princess her entire life, while you treated me like a burden because my skin was darker and my hair was thicker. You projected all of your deep-seated insecurities and internalized hatred onto me from the moment I was old enough to understand what colorism was. You made sure I knew every single day that I was the ugly duckling who would never be good enough to stand beside your precious golden child." My mother shook her head frantically, trying to deny the ugly truth that had defined our entire relationship. "That is not true," she sobbed. "I just wanted you to succeed. I pushed you hard because I wanted you to do well. You pushed me out of your heart," I corrected her, refusing to let her dodge accountability. "And the moment Vanessa brought a wealthy white man into this house, you completely lost your mind. You bowed down to Trent like he was a savior. You allowed him to make racist comments about my food and my culture right in front of you. You let him degrade me. You let him call me a college dropout and a failure. You sat in my living room today, bragging to Sister Mildred on speakerphone about your rich son-in-law, while I stood in the kitchen bleeding from major surgery cooking his meal. You sold your own flesh and blood for cheap church clout. You wanted so desperately to be accepted by the upper-class elite that you willingly fed your own daughter to a toxic, arrogant racist." "Simone, please," my mother begged, falling to her knees on the hardwood floor. "I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. I have lost my retirement money. I have nothing left. Please do not abandon me. You are all I have now." I stared down at the woman kneeling before me. I expected to feel a surge of triumph or vindication, but all I felt was a profound, overwhelming emptiness. The mother I had spent my entire life trying to impress was nothing more than a shallow, desperate stranger. "You did not just lose your retirement money today," I said, my voice remaining completely steady. "You lost your daughter. You lost the one person who actually cared enough to buy a house to keep you off the streets. You watched Vanessa physically assault me in the kitchen today. You watched Trent leave bruises on my arm, and you did absolutely nothing. A real mother protects her child. A real mother does not demand that her bleeding daughter serve the man who abuses her. I took a deep breath, feeling a massive invisible weight completely lift off my shoulders. The toxic invisible chains that had bound me to this family for 34 years finally snapped. I forgive you, I said, looking down into her wide, panicked eyes. I forgive you for all the years of pain and all the brutal comparisons. But forgiveness does not mean access. I am officially severing this tie. From this moment forward, I am no longer your daughter. You are no longer my mother. We have absolutely zero connection. Do not call me. Do not text me. Do not ever try to find me. If I ever see you near my restaurants or my home, I will immediately call the police and file a restraining order. My mother collapsed, sobbing into a pathetic heap on the hardwood floor. I gently pulled my cotton dress away from her desperate, grasping hands. I turned away from her forever, leaving her to rot in her own toxic, miserable delusions. I turned away from her forever, leaving her to rot in her own toxic, miserable delusions. I took a deep breath of the cool air drifting in from the open hallway. The heavy silence in the dining room was abruptly broken by the sound of Vanessa clearing her throat. She pushed herself up from the hardwood floor, smoothing down the wrinkled fabric of her expensive designer dress. Her mascara was completely ruined, and her face was blotchy and red, but she still tried to lift her chin and adopt that familiar arrogant posture. "Well," Simone Vanessa began, her voice shaky, but laced with an undeniable entitlement. "This has certainly been a traumatic evening for all of us. Obviously, Trent is going to be away for a while dealing with this ridiculous legal misunderstanding. Since my accounts are probably going to be frozen temporarily, I will just move my things into the master bedroom tonight. Mom can take the guest room you are staying in. You can just sleep down here on the couch until we figure out a better living arrangement for you. It is the least you can do, considering you just humiliated my husband in front of his entire company and completely ruined my dinner party." I stared at her in absolute disbelief. The sheer audacity radiating from her perfectly contoured face was genuinely astounding. She had just watched her husband get dragged away in handcuffs for embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars. She had just been exposed as a willing accomplice who helped drain our mother's life savings. Yet she still honestly believed she could snap her fingers and force me to sleep on the couch in my own house. I did not laugh. I did not yell. I simply raised my right hand and pointed a single finger directly toward the heavy oak front door. "My house." I stated, my voice echoing off the high ceilings with absolute finality. "Get out. Now." Vanessa's arrogant mask slipped instantly. She blinked rapidly, her eyes darting between my outstretched finger and my completely unyielding expression. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa scoffed, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. "You cannot kick me out into the street. It is freezing outside. Where am I supposed to go, Simone? I am your sister. You owe me." "You owe me absolutely nothing," I fired back, lowering my arm. "You lost the right to call yourself my sister the moment you laid your hands on me in that kitchen today. You lost that right when you stood by and let your racist husband threaten to throw me onto the street. You thought it was hilarious when he told me I was nothing but a worthless failure. Well, now the tables have completely turned. You have exactly 10 minutes to gather whatever cheap possessions you can carry before I have you physically removed from my property." Vanessa let out a piercing, theatrical shriek. Her face turned bright purple with pure, unadulterated rage. "You psychotic brat!" she screamed, stomping her high heel against the hardwood floor like a petulant toddler. "You think you have won? You think you can just throw us out like garbage? I will call Aunt Charlene. I will call Uncle Marcus. I will call the entire church congregation and tell them exactly what you did today. I will tell them you are a vicious, vindictive monster who set my innocent husband up and threw your own crying mother out into the cold night. I will completely ruin your reputation, Simone. I will make sure every single person in our community knows exactly how evil you truly are. You will never be able to show your face at a family gathering ever again. I smiled a cold, empty smile. Please call them. I challenged her, stepping closer, until she was forced to shrink back against the dining table. Call every single person in our family directory. Tell them you helped your husband steal Mom's retirement money. Tell them the police raided your dinner party because you bought designer bags with stolen corporate funds. Tell them whatever you want, Vanessa. They will see the arrest records in the morning news anyway. I do not care about your toxic gossip because I do not need any of those people. My reputation is built on my culinary empire and my hard work, not on fake social media posts and stolen wealth. I turned on my heel and walked purposefully into the kitchen, ignoring the sharp pulling sensation in my abdomen. I opened the pantry door, grabbed a heavy roll of thick black industrial trash bags, and marched right back into the dining room. I threw the roll hard against the floor. It landed right at Vanessa's expensive shoes. Start packing, I ordered. Vanessa stared down at the black plastic bags with absolute horror. She opened her mouth to scream another threat, but Julian stepped forward from the shadows. He raised his hand, signaling the two massive private security guards, who had been waiting quietly by his luxury vehicle outside. The guards immediately stepped through the open front door, their sheer physical presence instantly silencing Vanessa's tantrum. Escort these two women off the property, Julian commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Do not let them take anything that does not belong to them. The guards moved with swift, terrifying efficiency. One guard firmly grasped Vanessa's arm, dragging her away from the table while she sobbed hysterically. The other guard gently but firmly pulled my weeping mother up from the floor. They were marched out into the freezing night air, carrying nothing but their ruined pride. The heavy oak door slammed shut with a resounding thud, engaging the deadbolt automatically. The sudden absolute silence that enveloped the house was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I stood perfectly still, letting the incredible reality of my complete freedom wash entirely over my deeply exhausted body. I closed my eyes, finally breathing in absolute peace. 6 months later, that profound sense of peace had not faded, but had instead blossomed into a beautiful everyday reality. The physical scar on my abdomen from the gallbladder surgery had faded into a thin, faint silver line, serving as a quiet reminder of the exact day my entire life changed for the better. I no longer woke up with a knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach, anticipating the next insult or microaggression from my family. I woke up in my massive master bedroom, surrounded by soft sunlight and the quiet, comforting stillness of a home that belonged entirely to me. My physical healing was complete, but the mental and emotional healing was a much deeper journey. Stripping away 34 years of conditioned toxicity and colorism required deliberate daily effort. I spent the first few weeks working with an incredible therapist, unpacking the heavy baggage my mother had strapped to my back since childhood. I learned how to completely detach my personal worth from their twisted validation. The transition was made significantly easier by the sheer volume of desperate, pathetic voicemails I received and subsequently ignored. In the first 2 months, my blocked folder was absolutely overflowing with messages from both Vanessa and my mother. I would occasionally listen to them just to remind myself why I locked the door. Vanessa's messages always started with angry, entitled demands threatening to sue me for emotional distress before rapidly devolving into hysterical sobbing because Trent's assets had been frozen by the federal government and she was being forced to work at a retail store just to pay rent for her tiny apartment. My mother's messages were entirely different, but equally manipulative. She would cry and quote Bible verses, begging me to remember the importance of family and forgiveness, completely ignoring the fact that she was currently facing bankruptcy because her perfect son-in-law had stolen her entire retirement fund. I never responded to a single message. I deleted them all, letting their desperate voices vanish into the digital void. I had drawn a permanent boundary in concrete, and I refused to let them cross it ever again. Instead of feeding my energy into their bottomless pit of drama, I poured every single ounce of my passion and focus into my culinary empire. Julian and I had spent the last 6 months working tirelessly to launch our most ambitious project yet. We were opening a massive flagship restaurant in the heart of the city, an architectural masterpiece of glass and steel that perfectly matched the elevated, sophisticated menu I had spent years perfecting. Julian proved to be the most incredible business partner I could have ever asked for. He never once questioned my creative vision or tried to diminish my authority. He treated me with an absolute uncompromising respect that I had never experienced from a man before. He handled the complex corporate logistics and the aggressive real estate acquisitions while giving me complete total freedom to design the kitchen, the menu, and the overall dining experience. We were a flawless, unstoppable team. But the most beautiful part of this entire rebuilding phase was not the stunning new restaurant or the massive influx of wealth. It was the incredible chosen family I had carefully built around myself. Blood does not make a family, loyalty and mutual respect do. My kitchen was filled with people who valued my talent and protected my peace. My lead sous chef Marcus was a brilliant young culinary artist who had been with my catering company since the very beginning. He possessed the exact same relentless drive and passion for food that I did. We spent countless late nights in the massive industrial test kitchen, experimenting with complex flavor profiles, laughing loudly over failed recipes, and celebrating our culinary triumphs. Marcus and the rest of my kitchen staff became my true siblings. We celebrated birthdays together, we supported each other through personal hardships, and we built a culture of absolute trust and collaboration. There was no jealousy, no petty competition, and absolutely no tearing each other down for sport. When I walked into my kitchen, I was not the dark-skinned disappointment or the college dropout. I was Chef Simone, a respected leader, a mentor, and a fiercely loved friend. The week leading up to the grand opening of the flagship restaurant was a whirlwind of exhausting, exhilarating chaos. We were completely fully booked for the entire first 3 months, within exactly 1 hour of opening our reservation system. The city elite were clamoring to secure a table, desperate to taste the legendary menu that had secured my place as a majority shareholder in a billion-dollar hospitality group. On the night of our soft opening, dedicated exclusively to our closest friends and most trusted investors, I stood at the front of the massive, gleaming kitchen, looking out into the beautifully designed dining room. The warm, ambient lighting cast a golden glow over the plush velvet booths and the crystal glassware. The room was filled with the joyous, harmonious sounds of clinking glasses and genuine laughter. Marcus bumped my shoulder gently, handing me a small tasting spoon of our signature truffle reduction sauce to ensure it was absolutely perfect. I tasted it and smiled, nodding my approval to my incredible team. I looked across the dining room and caught Julian's eye. He was standing near the custom marble bar, wearing another immaculate dark suit, raising his glass of champagne toward me in a silent, proud toast. I raised my chin, smiling back at him, with a heart completely overflowing with gratitude. I had survived the worst betrayal of my life, and I had transformed that agonizing pain into an absolute masterpiece. I had lost a toxic family, but I had gained an entire universe of love, success, and unconditional support. The horrible nightmare was permanently over, and my spectacular new reality was just beginning to unfold perfectly. 1 year after that unforgettable night, my spectacular new reality reached a pinnacle I had only ever dreamed of achieving. I stood on a brilliantly lit stage, wearing a pristine white chef coat, feeling the heavy, polished weight of a Michelin star plaque in my hands. The applause from the crowd was deafening, but the only sounds that truly mattered were the loud, joyful cheers coming from my team in the front row. Marcus was jumping up and down, waving his arms like a proud little brother, while Julian stood beside him, smiling that quiet, knowing smile that always made my heart skip a beat. We had done it. We had poured our souls into the flagship restaurant, and the culinary world had recognized our absolute dedication. I looked out at the sea of flashing cameras and elegant evening gowns, realizing that I had finally cemented my legacy. I was no longer the girl hiding in the kitchen hoping to be seen. I was the master of my own universe, standing completely in the light. While my life was ascending to incredible new heights, the people who had tried to bury me were experiencing the crushing weight of their own actions. Justice had been swift and utterly merciless. Trent did not get the luxurious slap on the wrist he arrogantly assumed his white privilege would guarantee. Julian ensured that the forensic audit provided to the federal prosecutors was absolutely airtight, leaving no room for plea deals or clever legal maneuvers. The trial was a highly publicized media circus that exposed every single disgusting detail of his corporate fraud. Trent was convicted on all counts of embezzlement and wire fraud. He is currently serving a mandatory 5-year sentence in a federal penitentiary, completely stripped of his wealth, his titles, and his arrogant pride. The man who once threatened to throw me onto the street is now confined to a tiny concrete cell following strict daily orders from prison guards. His spectacular downfall dragged my sister and my mother right down into the mud with him. When the federal government seized his remaining assets to pay back the stolen corporate funds, Vanessa lost absolutely everything. Her luxury vehicles, her designer wardrobe, and her expensive jewelry were all auctioned off to the highest bidder. Because she had willingly participated in the financial deception surrounding the stolen retirement funds, she barely avoided jail time herself by cooperating with the authorities. But she could not avoid the brutal reality of extreme poverty. Vanessa and my mother were forced to move into a cramped, damp, one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. The women who used to mock my catering business and demand 5-star meals are now working grueling minimum wage jobs just to keep the lights on. Vanessa folds clothes at a discount retail store while my mother cleans floors at a local laundromat. The most devastating blow to my mother, however, was not the loss of her money, but the complete loss of her precious social standing. The moment the truth about that massive embezzlement and the fake mortgage scam became public knowledge, their beloved church community completely turned its back on them. The same women my mother used to gossip with on speakerphone now actively crossed the street to avoid speaking to her. Sister Mildred and the rest of the congregation entirely ostracized them, disgusted by their greed and their horrific treatment of me. They have no wealthy son-in-law to brag about, and no luxurious estate to host their fake tea parties. They have nothing but the bitter consequences of their own toxic choices. I occasionally hear these updates through the grapevine of old family acquaintances, but I never go looking for the information. Their misery brings me no joy, but it also brings me absolutely no guilt. They are simply strangers living a life they designed for themselves. I have not spoken a single word to either of them since the night I kicked them out of my house. My phone remains blissfully quiet, free from their manipulative guilt trips and their toxic demands. I chose to protect my peace, and it was the greatest decision I have ever made. I am sharing my story today because I know there is someone out there watching this right now who feels trapped by the heavy chains of family obligation. I know what it feels like to be the scapegoat, to be constantly belittled, and to have your immense potential suffocated by the very people who are supposed to nurture you. I want you to look at my life and realize that you do not have to accept the terrible role they assign to you. You are allowed to walk away from toxicity, even if it shares your bloodline. Never let family weaponize your loyalty against you. Do not let them use your kind heart as a doormat for their insecurities. You have the power to rewrite your entire story, and you have the right to choose who gets to sit at your table. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not anger or arguments. Sometimes the greatest revenge is your own spectacular success and the absolute peace of a blocked number. Keep building your empire, keep protecting your energy, and never apologize for outgrowing the people who tried to keep you small. If my journey resonated with you today, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments below how you have established boundaries in your own life and found your chosen family. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder of their own worth and strength. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch and listen to my story today. I truly appreciate your wonderful and consistent support. Stay strong and stay entirely focused on your own incredible goals, because always remember that your beautiful new reality is just one brave decision away. The harrowing journey of Simone teaches us a profound and often difficult lesson. Blood relations do not automatically entitle anyone to your endless loyalty, especially when that loyalty is met with abuse and disrespect. For decades, Simone endured severe emotional manipulation, colorism, and physical disregard from her own mother and sister. She believed that by providing for them, by buying the very roof over their heads, she could eventually earn the love and validation she was denied since childhood. However, the tragic reality she discovered is that toxic people do not change their behavior. When you give them more, they simply find new ways to exploit your generosity. The true turning point in this story is not just the dramatic exposure of Trent's corporate crimes or the revelation of the forged mortgage. The most powerful moment is when Simone finally recognizes her own immense worth and decides to sever the toxic ties completely. She realizes that her mother's affection was conditional, entirely dependent on superficial status and the proximity to white privilege. By kicking her abusers out and blocking their numbers, Simone reclaims her power. She stops seeking validation from a broken source and instead builds a chosen family rooted in mutual respect, shared passion, and unconditional support. This narrative brilliantly illustrates that protecting your peace is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary action of survival and radical self-love. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire simply to keep your family warm. True family will celebrate your successes, protect your well-being, and never demand that you shrink yourself to accommodate their deep insecurities or selfish expectations. You deserve to exist where you are entirely valued. Please examine the relationships in your own life and bravely set the boundaries needed to protect your peace today.